You ever notice how Greek mythology isn't just about heroes and monsters, but also about gods dishing out some insanely creative punishments? I mean, the Olympian gods were basically the universe's most powerful drama queens. Mess with them, and you could end up pushing boulders uphill forever, starving in front of a feast you can't eat, or getting turned into a freaking spider. These stories are wild, brutal, sometimes darkly funny, and they're one of my favorite parts of Greek myth. So, tonight, get cozy, because we're going to talk about every weird punishment in Greek mythology that I can possibly think of. This is going to be a long, winding ride through ancient tales of divine retribution. And don't worry, I'll keep it chill and conversational, like we're just hanging out talking about crazy myths. By the end, you'll see just how absurd and extra the gods could be when someone ticked them off. All right, let's dive in. Ahem, clears throat in a dramatic way. So, where to begin? There are a lot of weird punishments in Greek myth, but I think the best place to start is down in the deepest pit of the underworld, a dismal little zone known as Tartarus. Tartarus is basically the cosmic timeout corner, except, it's eternal torment instead of a 5-minute timeout. This is where the gods sent the absolute worst offenders, usually mortals or even a few immortals, who dared to defy them. And boy, did they get creative with the torture down there. One of the most famous residents of Tartarus is a dude named Sisyphus. You've probably heard of this guy even if you don't know his story, because his punishment is legendary. Sisyphus was a king, an extremely cunning and sneaky king of Corinth, who got it into his head that he could outsmart the gods. And at first, he kind of did. Sisyphus was known for tricking the gods and even cheating death not once but twice. Twice. This man looked at the concept of mortality and said, "Nah, I think I'll pass. Maybe later." How did he do it? Well, one time, when Zeus sent Thanatos, death, to chain him in Tartarus, Sisyphus casually asked Thanatos to show him how the chains worked. Then wham! Sisyphus trapped death himself in those shackles. Can you imagine the chaos? With death chained up, nobody could die. Battles became comically pointless because warriors kept on fighting without dropping dead. Ares, the god of war, was especially ticked off by this, since war isn't much fun if no one dies. So Ares rushed in, freed Thanatos, and handed Sisyphus over like, "Here, have your naughty mortal back." In another version, Sisyphus even managed to trick Persephone into letting him return to the land of the living by complaining that his wife didn't give him a proper funeral. He basically got a free round trip out of the underworld by playing on Persephone's sympathy. Gotta admit, the guy had skills, but Zeus and Hades were not going to let that slide forever. Once Sisyphus was finally recaptured and sent back to the underworld for good, the gods devised a special punishment just for him. They made him roll a gigantic boulder up a steep hill over and over, forever. And here's the kicker. Every time Sisyphus strained and pushed that massive rock near the hill's peak, probably gritting his teeth, sweating buckets, thinking he was about to finally finish his task, the boulder would magically roll right back down to the bottom. All that work, all that effort, instantly undone in a heartbeat. And he'd have to trudge back down and start again, ad infinitum. It's the ultimate exercise in futility. Talk about a workout routine from hell. Literally, the ancient writers say this was meant to punish Sisyphus for his pride in thinking he was cleverer than Zeus. Zeus was basically like, "Oh, you think you're smart? Outwit this, pal." And thus poor Sisyphus is stuck in an endless loop of pointlessness. It's such a powerful image that nowadays we use the term Sisyphean task for any job that feels endlessly laborious and futile. Like trying to untangle Christmas lights or keeping your room clean when you have a cat knocking stuff over. Completely Sisyphean. I sometimes imagine Sisyphus in Tartarus, pushing that rock up, watching it roll down and just going, "Ugh, not again," for the millionth time. At some point, you gotta wonder if he just started laughing at the absurdity or if he's perpetually frustrated. The French philosopher Albert Camus even wrote an essay suggesting we should imagine Sisyphus happy in that situation, finding meaning in the struggle itself. I love that idea, but I dunno. If it were me, I'd be pretty salty about the whole thing. Sisyphus's punishment is equal parts tragic and darkly comedic. The gods basically turned him into the universe's cruelest hamster wheel experiment. Welcome to Greek mythology, folks. Alright, so Sisyphus sets the bar for eternal torture pretty high or steep. But he's not alone down there. Another VIP in Tartarus's Hall of Fame, or rather Hall of Shame, is Tantalus. Now, Tantalus was also a king and a son of Zeus to boot, so you'd think he might get some slack. Nope. If Sisyphus's problem was thinking he was too clever, Tantalus's issue was that he was too bold and too proud. The myths vary on what exactly Tantalus did to deserve his punishment, and honestly none of the options paint him as a great guy. One story says he used to steal the god's special food, ambrosia and nectar, and give it out to his mortal buddies, which is a big no-no. Like Zeus gave him the honor of dining with the gods sometimes, and Tantalus abused the privilege by running off with doggy bags of ambrosia for his friends back home. Not cool. Another, even worse, story says Tantalus wanted to test the gods' omniscience. So he cooked and served his own son at a banquet to see if they'd notice. Yes, you heard that right. He chopped up his poor son Pelops into a stew and tried to feed it to Zeus and the Olympians. That is beyond messed up. The gods did notice, most of them anyway. Legend has it, Demeter was distracted, grieving her daughter Persephone at the time, and accidentally ate part of the stew before realizing what it was. Specifically, she ate the boy's shoulder. Don't ask me why it's always the shoulder in these stories, but apparently it was. The gods were horrified. They stopped Tantalus's little experiment immediately, brought Pelops back to life, replacing the missing shoulder with one made of ivory, an interesting little mythological detail, and then decided on a punishment for Tantalus that would fit his crime. So what do you do to a guy who tried to serve you a human stew or who can't keep his hands off divine food? You hit him with a food-related curse, of course. They dispatched Tantalus to Tartarus and put him in a beautiful garden with a pool of clear, fresh water and trees laden with the most delicious-looking fruits. Sounds nice, right? Only catch, he's never allowed to eat or drink any of it. Tantalus stands there, absolutely parched and starving, with cool water up to his neck and ripe fruits dangling in arm's reach, and he can never have any. Whenever he bends down to drink, the water in the pool magically recedes, so he's left mouthful of mud and nothing else. When he reaches up for a fruit, apples, figs, pomegranates, you name it, the branches lift up just beyond his grasp. The poor guy is eternally tantalized by food and drink he can see and smell but never consume. In fact, the word tantalize comes directly from this myth and his name, because he's tantalized by those unattainable goodies. Can you imagine the frustration? It's like someone putting your favorite dessert in front of you and saying, "Oh, you can't have it forever." For a foodie like me, that's nightmare material. And just to add to the torment, some versions of the myth say there was also a big rock hung over Tantalus's head, always threatening to fall on him. So even if he tried to jump for the fruit or something, nope, don't do that or this rock's gonna smash you. They really covered all bases with this one: physical torture, psychological torture, eternal hunger and thirst, and constant peril. If Sisyphus's punishment was absurd labor, Tantalus's was eternal, unfulfilled craving. It's cosmic irony at its finest. He's punished with perpetual starvation and thirst in a place full of food and water. Next time you're really hungry and the delivery is taking forever, just think of Tantalus and multiply that feeling by, like, infinity. Between Sisyphus and Tantalus, you might notice a theme. The gods liked punishments that matched the crime in ironic ways. You boast about beating death, you get a task you can never complete. You try to feed the gods human flesh or steal their food. You'll never eat a meal again despite food being right in front of you. It's like poetic justice, Greek mythology style. And it doesn't stop there, Tartarus has more. Gather round for more tales from the underworld. Next up is a guy named Ixion. Now, Ixion's story is a dumpster fire of bad decisions. He was a king who, depending on the version, started off by committing one of the first recorded acts of kinslaying. He killed his own father-in-law. That alone made him an outlaw under sacred law. Murdering a family member is a big no-no, and nobody wanted to purify him of his crime. But Zeus, showing a bit of mercy or maybe just nosy curiosity, said, "All right, I'll forgive you. Come on up to Olympus as my guest." Can you imagine? You get invited to party with the gods. This is your big chance to prove you've changed, to show gratitude. And what does Ixion do? He immediately blows it in the creepiest way possible. Up on Olympus, Ixion sees Hera, Zeus's wife, and apparently thinks, yeah, I'd like a piece of that. Bruh. Trying to seduce or outright assault. According to some versions, the queen of the gods while you're a guest in her husband's house? The sheer stupidity, I can't. Zeus obviously notices Ixion leering at Hera and decides to play a little trick to catch him. Zeus shapes a cloud into Hera's likeness, a cloud nymph decoy often called Nephili, and sets her near Ixion. Of course, the fool falls for it. He ends up coupling with this cloud thinking he's hooking up with Hera. Truly, a new definition of cloud computing. Am I right? Sorry. From this bizarre union of man and cloud comes a child, and not just any child, but the ancestor of the centaurs, those half-horse, half-man creatures. Yes, in Greek myth, the original centaur was the son of Ixion and a fluffy cloud made to look like Hera. I told you these stories get weird. Now, when Ixion starts bragging, to who, I wonder, who do you brag to about? Guess what? I hooked up with Hera. When he didn't actually? Zeus's patience snaps. Enough is enough. Zeus blasts Ixion with a thunderbolt, like a divine zap of bad dog. No, and sends him plummeting down to Tartarus. And there, Zeus orders a very special punishment. They bind Ixion to a fiery wheel. Some say a winged, flaming wheel, and set it spinning non-stop. So picture this. Ixion is strapped spread-eagle to a burning wheel that just whirls around and around without end, sometimes in the sky, sometimes in the depths of the underworld, depending on the myth. He's basically on the worst carnival ride ever, for eternity on fire. Early form of firewheel torture, courtesy of Zeus. And the symbolism? Oh, it's rich. Some say the ever-spinning wheel represents how Ixion's lust and treachery just go round and round, never ending. Or maybe it's a metaphor for him going in circles after such a heinous betrayal of hospitality. Me, I just think Zeus was like, you want Hera? How about you spin toward her forever but never actually reach her? While burning, you creep. An eternal restraining order, deluxe edition. So there goes Ixion, whirling through the air on his flaming wheel of doom, probably regretting every life choice that led him there. Fun fact, sometimes the wheel is said to represent the sun, and certain scholars thought Ixion's story might tie into solar mythology, but mostly, it's read as don't lust after the boss's wife, especially if the boss is Zeus. Pretty straightforward. While we're in Tartarus, we've got to mention the Danaids. Their punishment might not be as flashy as a flaming wheel, but it's just as weird and just as eternal. The Danaids were 50 sisters, daughters of King Danaus, who collectively hold the trophy for worst brides ever. Here's the backstory. Danaus had a bitter feud with his twin brother, who had 50 sons. 50 seems to be a popular number in these myths. Go big or go home, I guess. To make peace, they decided, hey, let's marry our 50 daughters to your 50 sons. Sounds like a logistical nightmare, but they went for it. Only Daddy Danaus wasn't really keen on this plan deep down. He suspected his brother's family of foul play and thought his new sons-in-law might kill him or something. So what does he do? On the wedding night, he gives each of his daughters a dagger and tells them, murder your husbands in their sleep. And most of them actually do it. Imagine the wedding reception. Lots of dancing, probably some ancient Greek wine, awkward toasts, and then that night, 49 grooms get stabbed in the heart by their new brides. Talk about a bloodbath. Only one daughter, Hypermnestra, couldn't go through with it because her husband, Lynceus, respected her wish to remain a virgin and didn't force himself on her. Consent matters, folks. Might save your life. But the other 49 sisters committed mass spousal murder at dear old dad's behest. Now, even in Mythland, that's a horrible crime. Zeus, or the judges of the dead, depending on version, condemned those 49 Danaids to what else an eternal task. They were sentenced to carry water in pitchers and forever fill up a bathtub or a jar that has holes in it. In other words, a never-ending chore with no result, much like Sisyphus's boulder. The water just keeps leaking out, so the tub never fills. Can you imagine these ladies down there, schlepping water in leaky jugs, exhausted and frustrated? For all time, the term Danaid's labor even became proverbial for a futile task. Sometimes they say it was actually sieves they carried, like literally trying to fill a container with a sieve. Good luck, gals. This punishment fits pretty well. They spilled their husband's blood. Now they have to endlessly carry water to replace what was lost, yet never succeed. It's symbolic of how their crime, killing families / their husbands, left a bottomless pit of guilt that can never be filled or washed away. Morbid? Definitely. But there's also a dark humor in picturing their despair every time the water sloshes out those holes. Ancient audience might have nodded like, yep, got what they deserved. While we're talking about underworld punishments, we can't skip Tityus. Tityus is one of those characters who's not super well known today, but his punishment sure is. He was a giant, like literally a giant, the son of Zeus. Again, Zeus got around, or maybe Gaia, Earth in some accounts. Tityus made a very poor decision too. He tried to assault the goddess Leto, who was the mother of Artemis and Apollo. Depending on the story, either he attempted to force himself on her, or in some versions he just got handsy. Regardless, think about who Leto's kids are. The twin archers Apollo and Artemis, two of the most deadly gods when provoked. Not surprisingly, when Tityus attacked their mom, those two showed up like an avenging SWAT team. Artemis and Apollo hit him with a volley of arrows or strikes, and bam, Tityus is killed. Good riddance. But again, death was too easy of an escape. As a son of Zeus or a favored giant, Tityus had a certain immortality, so Zeus was like, you know what, let's make an example of him. In Tartarus, Tityus gets stretched out. Some say he sprawled over 9 acres to give a sense of how huge he is, and 2 vultures come down and perpetually feast on his liver. Every day, these birds peck out and eat his liver, and every night, his liver grows back, only to be eaten again the next day. Sound familiar? It's basically the same punishment that another famous figure got. We'll get to him soon. So Tityus is eternally getting his innards chewed on, suffering constant agony for his crime against Leto. It's gruesome, and the message is clear. You mess with a goddess, you get something way worse than a restraining order. You get your guts literally munched on forever. Yikes. Now, here's a question. Why the liver? Both Tityus and one other poor soul we'll talk about have their livers eaten daily. In ancient Greek thought, the liver was considered the seat of certain emotions, desires, or even courage. Constantly destroying and regenerating the liver could symbolize unending emotional torment or unfulfilled desire. Or maybe it was just really gory and made people cringe in a serves him right kind of way. To me, it sounds like the worst imaginable torture. It's internal, so you're not going to pass out from bleeding externally too quick. It's vital, it's painful, and then it's all undone so it can happen again. The Greeks really knew how to make you suffer in imaginative ways. Alright, so we've got Sisyphus with his boulder, Tantalus with his unreachable feast, Ixion on his fiery wheel, the Danaids with their leaky jars, and Tityus with the vultures. Tartarus is basically the ultimate rogues gallery of people who ticked off the gods. And guess what? There's more. Because the Olympians had no shortage of anger or creativity. Let's talk about the OG firebringer, the Titan Prometheus. Prometheus is a bit different because he wasn't a mortal king like the others. He was a Titan, an immortal being of the older generation of gods. But that didn't make him immune to punishment. In fact, Zeus reserved a special torture for Prometheus that's become one of the most iconic punishments in myth. You see, Prometheus was actually a friend to humanity. In the very early days, according to myth, humans didn't have fire. We were eating raw food, shivering in caves or whatever. Zeus was actually fine with that. He was a tough love kind of guy toward humans. But Prometheus felt sorry for us. He had already helped shape humans. His name literally means forethought. And he wanted to give us a leg up. So he stole fire from the gods, either sneaking into Olympus and lighting a torch from Zeus's sacred lightning, or by tricking Zeus with a sacrificial offering and hiding a hot coal in a fennel stalk. There are a couple versions. One way or another, Prometheus smuggled fire down to mankind. Suddenly humans have warmth, cooked food, light in the dark civilization 101. Zeus, however, did not approve. Fire was supposed to be a divine privilege, and here was Prometheus handing it out like Halloween candy. Zeus was livid. Now, Prometheus had also ticked Zeus off earlier with a trick at a feast. He'd made Zeus pick the less desirable portion of an animal sacrifice by hiding the good meat under gross-looking stomach lining, and putting bones wrapped in tasty-looking fat in another pile. Zeus chose the flashy fat pile and got a mouthful of bones. Thus, from then on, humans burned bones to the gods and kept the meat. Zeus swallowed that insult at the time, but the fire theft was the last straw. Zeus decides to make an example of Prometheus in a big way. He has his servants, force and violence, in Hesiod's story, shackle Prometheus to a mountain way out in the Caucasus. They chain him up to the rocks, and then Zeus sends a giant eagle to torment him. Every single day, this eagle swoops in and eats Prometheus's liver out of his body. Yup, liver eating again. Apparently Zeus had a thing for that. Since Prometheus is immortal, being a titan, he can't die from this. So each night, his liver grows back, only for the eagle to return next morning for breakfast. And the whole horror show repeats day after day. Can we just take a moment to appreciate how extra that is? Zeus could have just kept him chained as a warning, but no, he adds daily organ eating. It's like, let that be a lesson to you, and I'll make sure you constantly remember that lesson for thousands of years. The eagle is often described as Zeus's emblem, so in a way it's like Zeus himself is personally taking a bite out of Prometheus each day. I always picture Prometheus groaning in pain as the eagle descends, and still, maybe still, having this attitude of defiance. Like, I do it again, you overgrown canary. Humans needed fire. You almost want to cheer for Prometheus despite his predicament because he did it to help us mere mortals. He's like a martyr for the cause of human progress, suffering endlessly so we could have barbecue and not freeze to death in winter. Thanks, buddy. In some versions, Zeus eventually allows Hercules, to rescue Prometheus many generations later, as one of his heroic labors. Heracles shoots that eagle down with an arrow and breaks the chains, finally freeing Prometheus. But only after, 30 generations of humans have gone by. In other words, Zeus let him squirm for a long, long time first. Classic Zeus. Also, fun fact, there was a condition to Prometheus's release involving an immortal centaur volunteering to die in his place, and Prometheus giving up some secrets to Zeus about a future prophecy. It's complicated, but the big picture, Prometheus's punishment was meant to last forever as payback for giving fire, and maybe too much hope, to humanity. Prometheus's story doesn't end with just him, by the way. Zeus also devised a punishment for mankind as retaliation. And that was Pandora, the first woman, who came with a jar, often mistranslated as box, full of all the evils and hardships. When Pandora's curiosity led her to open the jar, out flew all the troubles. Disease, famine, sorrow, you name it, everything except hope, which stayed inside. In effect, Zeus was like, oh, you like helping humans, Prometheus? Fine, I'll help them too, hold my nectar. And boom, humans got a lifetime supply of suffering to go with their new fire. Thanks, Zeus. So Prometheus got the liver-eating eagle treatment, and we got the metaphorical short end of the stick as well. Zeus could be petty on a cosmic scale. Since we're on the subject of titans in trouble, let's quickly mention Atlas. Atlas was a titan who actually fought against Zeus in the big war between titans and Olympians, the Titanomachy. When Zeus and the Olympian gods won, they dished out punishments to the titans that resisted. Most of the titans were thrown into Tartarus, imprisoned behind bronze walls, etc. But Atlas, he got a special job. Zeus condemned Atlas to hold up the sky on his shoulders forever. People often say Atlas is holding up the earth or the world. That's a common artistic interpretation. But in the original myth, it's the sky, the heavens, that he's forever preventing from collapsing back onto the earth. Either way, it's an eternal heavy lifting job with no vacation days. We're talking literally carrying the weight of the world, or heavens, until further notice, which effectively means eternity. Atlas appears in a famous encounter with Heracles. One of Heracles' labors was to fetch the golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides, and those apples were notoriously hard to get because they were guarded. Heracles convinces Atlas to help him out. Hey man, mind grabbing those apples for me? I'll hold the sky for a bit, give you a break. Atlas actually goes, sure, maybe thinking he could just not come back, leaving Heracles with the sky permanently. Atlas was so done with that job, but Heracles tricked him into taking the sky back. There's a great little sub-story where Heracles says, okay, I'll hold it again, But could you take it just a second so I adjust my cloak padding? Thanks. And whoosh, grabs the apples and leaves Atlas shouldering the heavens again. So even a big strong hero was like, nope, I'm not doing that forever. Poor Atlas is stuck there to this day in mythic imagery. If you've seen statues of Atlas with a globe on his back, that's inspired by his punishment. It's weird because it's not torture in the gore sense, but imagine the cosmic strain and isolation. Some later stories tried to sympathetically say that Atlas was turned to stone, becoming the Atlas Mountains in northwest Africa, by Perseus showing him Medusa's head, a kind of release from his duty. But originally, nah, he's just there holding up the sky eternally as punishment. Now, those are the big eternal punishments, but sometimes the gods punished mortals in other bizarre ways that weren't just about torture. Often it was about transformation. Greek myth has a whole subgenre of stories where someone angers a god or breaks some taboo, and bam, the gods turn them into an animal or a plant or a rock or some weird creature. Sometimes this could be seen as mercy or escape, but often it's a punishment or a humiliation. Let's talk about some of those because they are prime examples of the gods being extra. One of my absolute favorite transformation punishments, because it's just so over the top, is the story of Arachne. So, Arachne was a human woman, a weaver by trade, and not just any weaver, she was incredible at weaving. She wove tapestries so beautiful and detailed that people from all around were like, dang, that is fine work. Now, Arachne, being young and perhaps a bit full of herself, started boasting that she was better at weaving than anyone. Even Athena, the goddess of wisdom and crafts, weaving included. Oh, it's one thing to take pride in your work, but the Greeks had a term for this kind of boast, hubris, excessive pride that offends the gods. Athena heard about Arachne's claims and decided to pay her a visit, possibly in disguise as an old lady at first, telling her, hey, maybe tone it down, give the goddess her due. Arachne basically says, nah, I'm totally better. In fact, I wish Athena herself would come down and have a weaving contest with me. Okay, you asked for it. And Athena essentially says, challenge accepted. They set up a contest to weave the best tapestry. Athena weaves a glorious tapestry depicting the gods in all their majesty, and perhaps warning scenes of mortals who were punished for pride, just to remind Arachne, know your place. Arachne, on the other hand, weaves an absolute masterpiece showing, get this, scenes of the gods messing around and being stupid. She weaves all the times the gods misled or seduced mortals, basically calling them out on their many scandals, Zeus turning into a swan to get with Leda, a bull to get Europa, etc. It was gorgeous art, but content-wise it was like throwing shade at the whole divine family. The audacity. When Athena sees Arachne's work, two things happen. One, she has to admit it's flawless, maybe even better than her own, gasp, a mortal outdid a god. And two, she's furious about the subject matter. Petty in victory and in defeat, these gods. Athena essentially says, oh, you think this is funny? You think you're better than the gods? In a rage, she tears Arachne's tapestry to shreds and strikes Arachne on the forehead. Depending on the version, Arachne is so devastated by the destruction of her work and the realization that she offended Athena that she hangs herself right then and there out of shame. Other versions skip the suicide and say Athena straight up cursed her. But the outcome is the same. Athena takes pity or maybe just wants the humiliation to continue and transforms Arachne into a spider. You like weaving so much? Fine, weave forever. Essentially, Arachne becomes the first spider, doomed to weave webs for all time. Athena's like, mic drop, lesson taught. It's a weird punishment because on the one hand, Arachne doesn't get torn apart or starved or anything. She just becomes an animal. But for a proud human artisan, becoming a tiny spider is a pretty humiliating downgrade. And she still has to weave, but now it's an instinctual thing, not the glorious tapestries she once made. The myth doubles as an origin story for why spiders exist and why they spin webs. The Greeks loved explaining natural phenomena through myths. The word arachnid for the spider family actually comes from Arachne's name. Imagine that your pride gets you turned into a spider and thousands of years later scientists are like, yeah, we named this class of creatures after you. I'm not sure if that's flattery or eternal salt in the wound. Another great transformation tale is Niobe. If hubris were an Olympic sport, Niobe would medal for sure. Niobe was a queen of Thebes and had a huge family, usually said to be 14 children, 7 sons and 7 daughters. She was super proud of her kids, understandably, and boasted about them all the time. But then she went too far. During a ceremony in honor of the goddess Leto, who, recall, had just 2 kids, Apollo and Artemis, albeit very famous kids, Niobe basically says, "Why are we honoring Leto? I have 14 beautiful children, and she only had 2. I'm clearly the greater mother. I should be worshipped." Oh boy, on the list of things you don't do in Greek myth, insulting a goddess is near the top, especially insulting her children, which is deliciously ironic because Niobe is boasting about her own. Leto wasn't about to take that insult lying down. She sent her 2 children, Apollo and Artemis, now grown and armed to the teeth, to teach Niobe a lesson. During one of Niobe's proud parent moments, Apollo draws his bow and shoots down all 7 of Niobe's sons, one by one. Artemis does the same and kills all 7 of Niobe's daughters. In the blink of an eye, Niobe's boasting turns to utter horror as she watches 14 children collapse dead. Apollo and Artemis basically say, "Who's the better mom now? Huh?" Okay, they probably didn't say that, but that's the vibe. Niobe's husband Amphion either kills himself from grief or is also struck down, leaving Niobe completely alone. She is devastated beyond words. All that remains is unimaginable grief. And then the gods add a final touch. Zeus or Apollo, depending on the story, turns Niobe into stone. On Mount Sisyphus in her native land, her body becomes a rock, and yet even as a rock, she continues to weep endlessly. There's actually a cliff formation in what is now Turkey that people used to say was Niobe. It looks vaguely like a female face, and when the snow melts or it rains, water trickles down it like a statue that cries. How poetic and morbid is that Niobe becomes the literal embodiment of sorrow, a stone that eternally sheds tears. As punishments go, this one's heavy on pathos. It's not just, "I will turn you into something." It's, "I will break you, and you'll never stop mourning." Leto basically humbled Niobe to the max, from proud mother of 14 to a childless, voiceless rock. It's one of those myths that's often referenced in literature as the ultimate tragedy of prideful arrogance meeting divine wrath. I mean, one minute you're bragging at a party, the next minute you're a petrified waterfall of tears. Harsh. Let's do another. How about Lycaon? This one's great because it's basically the origin story of the word lycanthropy, werewolfism. So, Lycaon was a king of Arcadia and by all accounts not a nice guy. Depending on the myth, he was insanely wicked and maybe even a cannibal. The most famous version comes from Ovid's Metamorphoses, where Zeus comes down to earth to test how wicked people have gotten. This is just before he decides to flood the world, a whole other story. Zeus, in disguise, ends up at Lycaon's palace. Now, the custom is to show hospitality to guests in case they're gods in disguise, which, guess what, he was. Lycaon, however, is deeply suspicious. He's like, "If this is really Zeus, prove it. But you know what, I'm gonna test him." So that night, Lycaon takes a hostage or one of his own sons in some versions, kills him and cooks human flesh to serve to Zeus at dinner. What is it with offering gods human meat? These people never learn. Zeus, of course, knows what's up. He is fuming that this dude would 1. Murder someone as a dinner experiment and 2. Try to make him king of the gods, a cannibal unwittingly. As soon as Zeus sees the horrific meal, he blasts the table and roof with a thunderbolt. Lycaon freaks out and flees for his life. But Zeus catches him and decides a fitting punishment. You act like a subhuman monster? You enjoy murder and savagery? Fine, become a beast. Zeus transforms Lycaon into a wolf. In an instant, Lycaon grows fur. His mouth elongates into a snout with fangs. His hands and feet turn to paws with claws. He becomes the first werewolf, essentially. Now as a wolf, he still has some human awareness. A curse isn't fun if you don't know you've been cursed, right? The idea is he can now only howl and kill and roam as a predator, unable to speak or rule or interact as a human. Some versions say his eyes still gleam with the same cruel intelligence, but he's stuck in a beast's body. The name Lycaon is not coincidentally similar to lycos, Greek for wolf, and indeed we got the term lycanthrope from this myth. In fact, there were ancient Greek tales about a certain sanctuary of Zeus in Arcadia where supposedly a man would be turned into a wolf for 9 years if he tasted a sacrifice that was secretly human flesh. If he didn't eat any human meat while being a wolf for those 9 years, he could become a human again at the end. Wild stuff. But the key takeaway, Lycaon's punishment for his gruesome disrespect to Zeus was to become the very animal that represents uncivilized, ravenous behavior. It's poetic in a horror story way. He tried to bring out the beast in Zeus, so Zeus literally made a beast out of him. One could say Zeus was the original doghead of Lycaon. Okay, that joke was rough. Moving on. Speaking of people being turned into animals after angering the gods, I'd be remiss not to tell the tale of Actaeon. This is another one from the Artemis fan club of do not mess with the virgin goddess while she's bathing. Actaeon was a mortal hunter, basically out in the woods doing his thing with his pack of hunting dogs. He had no ill intentions toward Artemis as far as most versions go. He just was unlucky. See, Artemis, Diana to the Romans, is the goddess of the hunt and of chastity, and she valued her privacy. One hot day, she's bathing nude with her nymph companions in a secluded forest pool. Actaeon, wandering nearby, accidentally stumbles upon this scene. Suddenly, there he is, seeing a goddess in her full natural state. Oh no, Artemis is mortified and enraged. She's as modest as she is fierce, and a mortal man has just seen her naked, something no man is supposed to see. Actaeon's like, whoa, sorry, I didn't see anything. I'll go. But Artemis isn't in a forgiving mood. She splashes water or just speaks a curse onto Actaeon and turns him into a stag, a male deer, on the spot. Poor Actaeon suddenly has antlers sprouting from his head. His limbs shift into slender deer legs. His skin grows a pelt of fur. In a panic, he tries to call out to his hunting party, but now he can only make deer bleats. If that wasn't bad enough, his own pack of hunting dogs picks up the scent of the deer and, not recognizing their master, they chase him down. Actaeon, now a full stag, finds himself running for his life from his loyal hounds. The dogs catch him, pounce, and tear him to pieces, devouring him, while his consciousness, one hopes it faded at the end, is like, this is literally the worst way this could have gone. Artemis watches this happen, unrelenting. In some versions you get a sense she eventually feels a tiny bit of pity, but mostly it's portrayed as he saw what no man should see, and he paid the price. Now, did Actaeon deserve this? Ancient opinions varied. Some versions, especially later tellings, try to paint Actaeon as maybe intentionally ogling Artemis or even lusting for her to justify the punishment. There's an idea floated that maybe he bragged about being a better hunter than Artemis or something to that effect, which would add the hubris element. But the more basic version is just tragic accident meets divine overreaction. Either way, as a myth it served as a caution. Mind your own business and definitely don't spy on Artemis. She once killed another guy, Orion, possibly just for trying to date her, or it was Apollo's trick, long story. She did not mess around with the whole chastity thing. Alright, we've got spiders, rocks, wolves, deer. How about cows? Let's talk Io, one of Zeus's many unfortunate love interests. Io was a princess or priestess of Hera in Argos, and Zeus fell for her. Classic Zeus, he starts an affair. To hide this from Hera, Zeus turned Io into a beautiful white cow. Now, whether Hera was fooled or not, she played along. Oh, what a lovely cow. May I have it as a gift? She asked Zeus. Trapped by his own ruse, Zeus had to say yes. So Hera takes Io the cow and places her under guard by the giant Argus Panoptes, a creature with 100 eyes who never all closed at once. Some of his eyes were always open, the ultimate watchdog. Poor Io is now a cow prisoner, scared and separated from Zeus, who can't openly rescue her without admitting his infidelity. Zeus sends Hermes to deal with Argus. Hermes manages to lull all 100 eyes to sleep, some say by telling boring stories or playing lullaby music, and then kills Argus. That's why Hermes gets the epithet Argiphantes, meaning slayer of Argus. Hooray, Io is freed from the guard, but she's still a cow. and Hera is still mad. So Hera sends a gadfly, a nasty biting fly, to sting and chase Io relentlessly. Io the cow is driven mad by this constant stinging. She runs away, wandering the world to escape the gadfly's bite. She swims across a sea, thereafter called the Ionian Sea, after her, and crosses the strait between Europe and Asia, which gets named the Bosphorus, meaning Oxford or cow crossing, after her as well. Imagine being turned into a cow and then essentially tormented on a world tour of ancient geography. She eventually ends up in Egypt, and there at last Zeus restores her human form, or in some versions, Hera finally allows her to be transformed back, perhaps once Io reaches Egypt. Io, back as a woman, ends up bearing Zeus's child and even marrying an Egyptian king. She becomes an ancestor of many heroes, including Heracles. So her story kind of ends happily, but that middle part? Horrible. Hera basically made her life a living nightmare of irritation and loneliness. The gadfly punishment is almost comical in concept. I'm gonna sick a little bug on you. But imagine a fly that never stops biting you, day after day, for months or years. It's like an itch you can never scratch, sleep deprivation, and stress all rolled into one, on top of being stuck as an animal. That's psychological torture, courtesy of Hera. Honestly, a lot of Zeus's girlfriends/wives got the short end of the stick from Hera's punishments. Hera couldn't easily punish Zeus, he's top god, and her husband. So she often redirected her wrath to the women and their offspring. It's messed up, but that's one of the recurring themes. Hera as the vengeful, jealous wife. Another example of Hera's wrath by transformation. Callisto. She was a follower of Artemis, a virgin huntress, taking a vow of chastity like the rest of Artemis's entourage. Zeus, being the menace he is, noticed Callisto and decided he had to have her. One creepy tale says Zeus actually disguised himself as Artemis. Imagine that, the father of the gods cosplaying as his daughter, yikes, to approach Callisto so she wouldn't suspect and run. Then he revealed himself and seduced or assaulted her, depending on the telling. Point is, Callisto gets pregnant, which is a big no-no in Artemis's group. Fast forward and one day, while all the girls are bathing together, these bath scenes never end well. Artemis sees that Callisto is very pregnant and is furious at the betrayal of the vow. Some say Artemis turned Callisto into a bear on the spot in anger. Others say Hera found out about Zeus and Callisto and she's the one who transformed Callisto into a bear out of spite. Either way, Callisto goes from a lovely maiden to a lumbering bear, probably terrified and confused. To make matters worse, years later her son, by Zeus, named Arcas, almost kills her. The boy grows up to be a hunter, and one day he encounters this bear in the woods, not knowing its mom, and is about to shoot it. Zeus intervenes at the last second, because even he thinks this is too tragic, and turns Arcas into a bear as well, or just swoops them both into safety. Then Zeus places both Callisto and her son as constellations in the sky. Callisto becomes Ursa Major, the Great Bear. We see it as the Big Dipper part of that constellation. And Arcas becomes Ursa Minor, the Little Bear, Little Dipper. That's kind of Zeus's way of saying, sorry about all that, here have immortality as stars. It's still a weird punishment timeline. The actual punishment was being a bear for presumably 15 plus years, fearing for her life, etc. The constellation part seems like an afterthought. Also, fun epilogue, Hera was still not happy and asked Ocean or Tethys that those constellations never be allowed to rest below the horizon. As an extra you're stuck in the sky and can't even dip into the ocean to cool off. In ancient Greek view, Ursa Major never sets, which is true in the northern hemisphere. It's circumpolar. Talk about holding a grudge. So yeah, Callisto's punishment was multi-phase. Humiliation by transformation and near death by her own child's hands. All because Zeus couldn't keep it in his toga and Hera was vindictive. Another case of transform to punish that I find intriguing is Medusa. Now, Medusa's story has a couple of variations, but the one commonly told, largely thanks to Ovid, definitely frames it as a punishment. Medusa was said to be a beautiful mortal woman, so beautiful that she caught the eye of Poseidon, god of the sea. Poseidon, unfortunately, didn't exactly woo her politely. He basically attacked her, and depending on the version, in Athena's temple no less. So one reading is, Medusa is actually a victim here. But Athena, whose temple was defiled by this act, chose to take it out on Medusa rather than Poseidon, who, as a god and Athena's uncle, was probably off-limits for direct retribution. Athena turns Medusa into a hideous gorgon, a monster with snakes for hair and a gaze that turns anyone who looks at her to stone. In a flash, lovely Medusa goes from being a young woman to a terrifying creature isolated from all society, literally deadly to anyone around her. She and her sisters, who in some versions were transformed to monsters too, or were always monsters, end up living at the ends of the earth. Eventually, the hero Perseus, with Athena's help, comes to cut off Medusa's head, but that's long after. The initial transformation is the punishment part. Medusa's crime, in Athena's eyes, could be seen as either having consensual relations in the temple or just being there when Poseidon was. Either way, harsh. She basically got punished for Poseidon's lust. It's one of those myths that modern readers often critique as victim-blaming by the gods, which it is. Some have tried to reinterpret it. Maybe Medusa had claimed to be more beautiful than Athena or something, provoking the goddess's wrath. There is a version where Medusa was boasting about her looks, saying even Athena's beauty paled next to hers. So Athena fixed that by making her ugliness personified. In any case, the result is weird and iconic, snaky hair and petrifying gaze. As a gorgon, Medusa's stare turning men to stone is kind of metaphorically fitting if the angle is, don't look at what you shouldn't or don't lust after what is sacred, etc. But I suspect the Greeks also just loved how eerie it was. Medusa's face, with those snake locks, became a protective symbol on shields and temples, the famous Gorgonian image. Ironically, her horrible, punished visage was used to ward off evil. So even in punishment, she found a purpose, in a way. Still, tough break for Medusa. One day a pretty priestess, next day a monster that has to hide from all civilization and can literally never have someone look at her again without them dying. Let's lighten it a bit. How about a punishment that's more embarrassing than deadly? Enter King Midas and his donkey ears. Now, Midas actually got hit with two punishments in myth, and both are kind of humorous in a dark way. The first one is well known. He asked for the golden touch as a reward from Dionysus, then nearly starved when everything he tried to eat or drink turned to gold, including, famously, his poor daughter in some versions. Realizing maybe this was a bad idea, he begged Dionysus to take the gift/curse away, and Dionysus told him to wash in the river Pactolus, which then forever had gold dust in its sands. Lesson learned, don't be greedy. But that was more of a cautionary tale than a punishment by a god's wrath, since Midas requested it. The real punishment from a god's wrath came when Midas had the audacity to judge a music contest between gods poorly. So, there was a contest between Apollo, god of music, lyre, supernaturally good at tunes, and Pan, god of rustic music, think pipes, more folksy. Pan plays his pan flute and maybe it's catchy, who knows. Apollo plays his lyre and obviously it's divine. All observers agree Apollo is the winner, except Midas, who either didn't get the sophisticated melody or just wanted to suck up to Pan. Midas goes, I actually think Pan's jam was better. Apollo was not about to let that slide. He basically says, if you think that kind of music is better, you must have the ears of an ass. And poof, Apollo turns Midas's ears into donkey ears. Yep, big floppy, furry donkey ears on the king's head. Suddenly Midas can hear like a donkey, and he definitely looks ridiculous. Apollo's punishment was essentially, you have bad taste, so I'll make you look as stupid as your taste. Midas, mortified, tries to hide his new appendages under a turban or a big hat. Only his barber learns the truth when cutting his hair. Must have been a shock to lift the hat and see those. Midas swears the barber to secrecy. The barber, however, is bursting to tell someone because it's gossip of the century. He can't talk about it, so he goes to a quiet marsh, digs a little hole and whispers into it. King Midas has donkey ears, then covers it up, thinking the secret is safe. But aha, the reeds of the marsh grow, and when the wind blows through them, they whisper the words the barber buried. Midas has donkey's ears. Midas has donkey's ears. Soon everyone hears the whisper on the wind. Midas's embarrassment is complete. In some versions, Apollo later forgives Midas and takes away the ears once Midas has been humbled. In others, Midas just lives with it. But it's a far less lethal punishment than the ones we discussed earlier. It's almost played for laughs. I can imagine Midas going around with those ears and everyone snickering behind his back. Or not even behind his back. Still, if you've ever had an awkward haircut or a bad hair day, multiply that shame by 1,000 and you get the idea. He probably wished he could turn invisible, not things to gold, at that point. Now for a gruesome one, Marsyas. Marsyas was a satyr, or sometimes described as a shepherd, who had the misfortune of picking up a musical instrument that a goddess had discarded. The goddess was Athena, who invented the double flute, aulos. She gave up on it because the other gods teased her that playing it puffed her cheeks ugly. So she said, "Forget this flute," and tossed it. Marsyas finds it, learns to play, and becomes really good, so good that people compare him to Apollo. And Marsyas, either out of pride or just being goaded by others, ends up in a music contest against Apollo. Those never end well for the challenger. In some versions, Marsyas challenges Apollo. In others, Apollo sets up the contest to put the satyr in his place. They agree on rules. The victor can do anything to the loser. Yikes, that's ominous. They play, and depending on the myth, either the muses or King Midas or others are judges. Marsyas actually holds his own on the flute against Apollo's lyre. So Apollo says, "All right, let's raise the stakes. We'll play instruments upside down and sing at the same time." Marsyas with a flute can't do that. Nice trick, Apollo. So Apollo wins by default. Now Apollo has the right to do whatever he wants to poor Marsyas. And Apollo, being a god whose pride was on the line, chooses one of the most horrific punishments imaginable. He ties Marsyas to a tree and flays him alive, literally skins him alive. The myth says that Marsyas' blood and tears formed a river, the river Marsyas in Phrygia. Even the gods and muses were said to mourn Marsyas after the fact, implying Apollo might have gone too far. But Apollo was like, "That's what you get for challenging a god. It's raw, it's brutal." Ancient art often showed a satyr hung up and Apollo with a knife. Not a pretty sight. This story is basically a giant, do not challenge the gods billboard. If Arachne and Niobe's tales weren't enough, this one hammers it home with gore. Yet, in a weird way, Marsyas became a sort of symbol for the value of artistic freedom or the tragedy of hubris. The punishment definitely qualifies as weird and awful. Imagine being literally peeled like a grape. Okay, nope, don't imagine that as you're trying to relax. My bad. But you see how colorful, blood red in this case, these myths can get. Apollo wasn't always the rational, kind god of light. Cross him, and he might turn you into a cautionary tale. Now, speaking of Apollo dishing it out, how about Cassandra? This is a punishment of a very different sort. Cassandra was a Trojan princess, very beautiful and clever. Apollo fell in love or lust with her and offered her a gift. The power of prophecy, the ability to see the future. Normally, not a shabby gift, Cassandra accepted the gift. Some say Apollo gave her the gift in exchange for agreeing to be with him. But then she changed her mind and rejected Apollo's advances. Apollo, furious at being denied after giving her this ability, couldn't take back the gift. Apparently God gifts are one way, so he added a curse to it. Cassandra would still see the future, but no one would ever believe her. Imagine that. It's like giving someone an amazing superpower with a cruel twist. Cassandra would tell people exactly what was going to happen. She foresaw the Trojan War, the fall of Troy, the Trojan horse scheme, even her own demise. And everyone would roll their eyes. Yeah, okay, Cassandra, sure. Even her family thought she was mad or lying. Her accurate warnings were ignored time and time again. This drove her kind of insane with frustration. As it would, it's a psychological punishment, making her life a tragic nightmare. She knew of disasters before they came and was powerless to prevent them because of Apollo's curse. In the war, she's assaulted by Ajax, the Lesser, at Athena's temple, an awful event she likely foresaw. She ends up a captive concubine to King Agamemnon and foresees both of them being murdered when they return to Greece. But again, nobody listens. It all happens as she saw, and she dies, with the final bitter knowledge that she was right but never heeded. That's Apollo's doing a very different flavor of punishment. It's not violent, at least not until others make it violent, but it's cruel in a mental way. We even use the term Cassandra complex today for when someone's warnings aren't believed. Apollo essentially said, "Oh, you won't be mine? Fine. I'll make sure your gift brings you nothing but pain." Brutal god ego there. We can't leave out Pentheus, which is one of the goriest punishments orchestrated by Dionysus, the god of wine and madness. Pentheus was the king of Thebes and a cousin of Dionysus. When Dionysus came to Thebes to introduce his worship, Pentheus was a straight-laced, no-nonsense ruler who was like, "We're not having any of that wild cult stuff in my city." He forbid the baksheik rites, basically disrespecting Dionysus's divinity and trying to suppress his worship, also imprisoned some of Dionysus's followers. Dionysus, who is a god that demands recognition and can drive you mad if you don't, decided to punish Pentheus in an ironically fitting way by using Pentheus' own family. He lured Pentheus out to spy on the secret baksheik rituals in the mountains, even convincing Pentheus to dress as a woman to be less conspicuous. Awkward situation for Mr. Macho King. Pentheus climbs a tree to get a better look at the wild dancing of the Maenads, Dionysus's frenzied female worshippers. That's when Dionysus gives the Maenads a vision that Pentheus is a wild animal, a lion or a boar. Among these frenzied women are Pentheus' own mother, Agave, and her sisters. In a mad rage, they spot this animal, really Pentheus, in the tree, pull him down, and tear him limb from limb with their bare hands. Agave, his mother, is the one who rips his head off, not knowing it's her son. She triumphantly sticks his head on a thyrsus, a kind of ivy-wreathed staff, and parades it around, until the god lifts the madness and she realizes in horror what she's done. This all happens because Dionysus willed it as punishment for Pentheus' disbelief and disrespect. It's dramatized in Euripides' play The Bacchae, which really brings out how chilling this punishment is. The moral is, accept the god or face the god's wrath, and Dionysus's wrath is insanity. He didn't just kill Pentheus. He destroyed his entire family's sanity and lineage in one stroke. Is it a weird punishment? Absolutely, in the sense of how theatrical and complete it is. It wasn't a simple lightning bolt. It was a scenario carefully engineered to be as horrific and ironic as possible. Pentheus wanted to peep on the crazy rites, and that curiosity got him killed by those rites, by his own mom no less. Greek myths weren't big on half measures. Now, sometimes humans themselves came up with twisted punishments that ended up in the myth books, often as cautionary tales or just legendary cruelty. One famously gruesome device was the brazen bull of King Phalaris. This isn't exactly a punishment by the gods, but it's a mythical or semi-historical punishment device that's too weird not to mention. Phalaris was a tyrant of Acragas in Sicily around 6th century BC, and the story goes that a craftsman named Perillos made him a giant hollow bronze bull statue that was actually an execution device. You lock a victim inside this metal bull, then light a fire underneath it, basically roasting the person alive inside. As if that's not horrific enough, the bull was engineered so that the screams of the burning victim would echo through pipes and sound like an ox bellowing. Essentially, it turned human agony into the moo of a bull. Talk about messed up. Phalaris, the tyrant, reportedly was like, "Ah, what a splendid idea." But in a delicious twist, he decided to test it on its inventor first, so Perillos himself became the bull's first victim. Poetic justice much. Some versions say Phalaris then also met a similar fate when he was overthrown. The angry populace or a rival tyrant cooked him in his own bull. It's likely this story is exaggerated or apocryphal, but the brazen bull became legendary as an example of cruelty. While not a myth in the sense of Zeus throwing lightning, it entered the lore of Greek punishments as something so extreme it almost sounds like something a depraved god would imagine. I mean, it has the theatrical irony of a myth. The invention backfires on the inventor. Even though it's humans doing it to humans, it fits with the theme that weird punishments capture the imagination. And how about those colorful punishments dealt by the heroes? For example, The hero Theseus encountered bandits on the road to Athens, each with their signature sadistic method of dispatching victims, which you could consider punishments they imposed on travelers. One was Procrustes, who had a literal one-size-fits-all bed. When guests came by, he'd offer them lodging, then tie them to his iron bed. If the person was too tall and their limbs hung off, he'd chop off the excess length. If they were too short, he'd stretch them until they fit. Absolutely gruesome and absurd, thus, Procrustean bed became a term for arbitrarily forcing things to fit one mold, with violent disregard for natural variation. Theseus eventually gave Procrustes a taste of his own medicine, cutting or stretching him to death on that same bed. Then there was Sisyphus, the pine bender, who would tie people's limbs to bent pine trees and then release the trees, tearing the victims apart. And Chiron, who forced travelers to wash his feet on a cliff and then kicked them into the sea to be eaten by a giant turtle. These aren't divine punishments, just criminal cruelty, but the myths had Theseus turn the tables on each villain, which kind of frames it like the bad guys got punished in fitting ways themselves. Procrustes gets cut, Sisyphus gets catapulted by a tree, Chiron gets kicked into his own turtle pit. It's like mythological karma in action, and it certainly adds to the catalog of weird, gruesome fates. At this point, you might be thinking ancient Greece had some serious issues. And you wouldn't be wrong, their myths are full of extreme justice. But keep in mind, these stories often carried lessons. Honor the gods, uphold hospitality, avoid excessive pride, respect boundaries, etc. The weird punishments are memorable ways to hammer those morals home. The gods could have just zapped people out of existence, and sometimes they did, but it was way more impactful to have them linger in some twisted state. It also made for great storytelling. I mean, a story where Zeus obliterates Niobe in an instant wouldn't tug the heartstrings like the image of a weeping stone does. The Greeks knew how to craft a narrative that sticks with you. Now, not every punishment was forever. Some were temporary ordeals, but weird nonetheless. One example, Hercules, the greatest hero, was punished with temporary madness by Hera, leading him to kill his family, which then led to his famous 12 labors as essentially a penance. The labors themselves were dangerous tasks he had to perform to purify his soul. Capturing man-eating horses, holding the sky for a bit when he helped Atlas, even cleaning massive stables by rerouting rivers. That one sounds less horrific and more just gross/hard. Those Augean stables were filthy, man. The fact that even the big heroes had to atone or suffer in some way shows that nobody was above divine law. Another interesting case, Tiresias, the blind prophet of Thebes. How'd he become blind and prophetic? There's a myth for that which is a bit of a gender-bending oddity. Tiresias, as a young man, came upon two snakes mating and, for some reason, whacked them with a stick. This angered Hera, and she turned Tiresias into a woman as punishment. Odd choice, but okay. Tiresias lived as a woman for several years, even became a priestess of Hera, married, maybe had children. Later, again she found mating snakes, apparently a theme in his life, and either left them alone or struck them again depending on version, and that turned Tiresias back into a man, so Hera's curse was lifted. Now, having lived life as both genders, Tiresias was once asked by Zeus and Hera to settle a marital dispute. Specifically, they argued about whether men or women enjoy sex more. Zeus said women do, Hera said men do. Tiresias, having the unique perspective, sided with Zeus. Women, he said, feel 10 times more pleasure than men. Hera did not like that one bit, maybe feeling it was an insult for revealing divine secrets, or just mad that he didn't agree with her, and she struck Tiresias blind. Zeus couldn't undo that curse rule. One god can't just nullify another's act if they're of roughly equal power, but to compensate, he gave Tiresias the gift of prophecy and a lifespan of 7 generations. So Tiresias ended up a revered seer, albeit blind. In a way, it's a weird double punishment with a silver lining. Hera punished him for the snake thing by changing his sex, then punished him again by taking his sight, and Zeus rewarded him to balance it out. The result, blind prophet. This myth touches on a lot curiosity, taboo, the battle of the sexes, but at its core it's about a mortal caught in the crossfire of the gods' arguments and getting whiplash from divine punishments and gifts. I should also mention Phineus, a mortal king, who was punished not by transformation or eternal labor, but by an annoyance that sounds mild until you think about it. Phineus had the gift of prophecy too, sometimes said to be from Apollo. But he made a mistake. He revealed too much of the gods' plans to people. Zeus likes to keep some mystery. Can't have a prophet spoiling all the cool stuff he's got in store. So as punishment, Zeus struck Phineus blind, lots of blindness as punishment in myths, symbolic of lack of wisdom or crossing a line of knowledge, and set the harpies on him. Harpies are these vicious bird women who basically acted like relentless pests. Every day, whenever Phineus tried to eat, the harpies would swoop in and snatch the food from his table or defile it. Some say they'd poop or vomit on the food. Yeah, disgusting. So Phineus was left starving, surrounded by the aroma of spoiled or stolen food. This sounds a bit like Tantalus, doesn't it? It's a motif, hunger as punishment. Phineus languished like that until the heroes of the Argonauts came by and helped chase the harpies away. But for a long time, the poor guy had weird, nasty food thieves ruin every meal. Zeus essentially said, "You want to tell people what's going to happen? Fine. You won't enjoy what happens to you now." Looking at all these stories, a pattern emerges. The punishment always fits the crime or the personality of the criminal in an ironic way. Hubris gets you humiliated. Greed gets you unfulfillable desire. Violence begets violence upon yourself, and so on. It's like each mythological punishment is a dark little fable. Be careful what you do, because the universe, or Zeus, is taking notes and has a twisted sense of humor. Let's recap a bit some of the ones we covered, just to appreciate the variety. Sisyphus with the boulder for cheating death. Tantalus with the unreachable food for betraying the gods' trust and feeding them human stew. Prometheus chained up with an eagle eating his liver for giving fire to mankind. Atlas holding up the sky for leading the Titans against Zeus. Ixion spinning on a fiery wheel for lusting after Hera. The Danaïdes carrying water in leaky jugs for killing their husbands. Tityus, staked down with vultures eating his liver for assaulting Leto. Arachne turned into a spider for her arrogance in weaving. Niobe turned into a weeping stone for bragging about her kids and disrespecting Leto. Lycaon turned into a wolf for trying to test/insult Zeus with human flesh. Actaeon turned into a stag and torn by his dogs for seeing Artemis bathing. Callisto turned into a bear and almost killed by her son, for either breaking her vow or attracting Zeus's attention. Medusa turned into a snake-haired Gorgon for desecrating Athena's temple, even if not her fault. Echo cursed to only repeat others for distracting Hera. Narcissus, who we talked about tangentially through Echo's story, was cursed by Nemesis to fall in love with his own reflection so he'd know how unrequited love feels. He withers away and becomes a flower, the Narcissus flower, named after him, another transformation punishment, in a sense, for being vain and cruel to admirers. Midas given donkey ears for foolish judgment in music. Marsyas flayed alive for daring to challenge Apollo. Cassandra given foresight but cursed to be ignored. Pentheus driven to be ripped apart by his mom for denying Dionysus. And then some mortal-on-mortal horrors like the brazen bull roasting or Procrustes' bed of torture. That is quite the catalog of horrors and oddities. If you think modern punishments can be extreme, the Greeks were like, hold my wine. They had no problem imagining fates worse than death. Yet, as ghastly as these punishments are, I find them endlessly fascinating. They are so rich in symbolism and drama. A guy pushing a rock forever makes you ponder about futile labor in life. A man eternally thirsty with water at his chin makes you think of desire and deprivation. A woman turned spider cautions against hubris, but also explains something we see around us. Spiders weaving webs. A wolfman myth taps into our deep-seated fears of losing humanity and becoming a beast. And a lot of these punishments, for all their divine overkill, contain a grain of you kinda had it coming from the perspective of the culture. The Greeks valued sophrosyne, moderation, humility, and xenia, hospitality, and respecting the hierarchy of gods over men. When those were violated, the myths show these dramatic snapbacks. It's also interesting to see how these myths have permeated our language and culture. I mentioned Sisyphean and Tantalus. We talk about someone's Achilles heel for a fatal flaw, different story, or Pandora's box for unleashing chaos. We call self-absorbed people narcissists after Narcissus. Someone with a doomsday prediction no one believes might be said to have a Cassandra complex. An overly harsh, exact standard might be called Procrustean. When a punishment seems excessive, we might call it draconian, though that's from Draco, an overly strict lawgiver in Athens, not a myth. And of course, Herculean task, for something extremely difficult, from Heracles' labors. It's amazing how these ancient tales of weird punishments still echo in our vocabulary and metaphors. Now, a quick breather to consider. Were the Greek gods always this cruel? They had soft spots, too. Sometimes they punished to teach a lesson, and once the lesson was learned or the point made, they moved on. Some characters who were punished eventually got redemption or release, like Prometheus freed by Heracles, or Callisto placed among the stars, or Io restored. But many others, Sisyphus, Tantalus, etc., nope, they're meant to suffer forever. The Greeks had an idea of the afterlife where great sinners just kept at it. It wasn't exactly about rehabilitation. It was cosmic justice. The concept of eternal punishment for mortals really comes into focus in these myths, and it's interesting because the Greek afterlife wasn't like the later Christian heaven/hell scenario for everyone. Only a few really bad ones got singled out for never-ending torture. Most people's souls just sort of existed in a mess state in Hades, with a few lucky heroes in Elysium, the paradise. So Tartarus was more like a special prison for the worst of the worst and imprisoned gods/titans. It's telling that the ones they chose to put there, Sisyphus, Tantalus, Ixion, Tityus, Danaids, all had committed either crimes against the gods or egregious violations of guest hospitality or kinship. Those were the taboos you just didn't break. Before we wrap up, one more quick weird punishment. Erysichthon, if you can pronounce that, gold star. This was a Thessalian king who made the mistake of chopping down a sacred grove of Demeter, including a big old oak tree that was dear to the goddess. Demeter, goddess of harvest and grain, didn't smite him on the spot. She thought of a nastier punishment. She inflicted Erysichthon with insatiable hunger. A hunger that only grew the more he ate. Imagine never feeling full, no matter how much you stuff your face. Always starving, stomach gnawing, pain, frenzy. Erysichthon devoured his entire pantry, then his wealth buying more food, then even sold his own daughter into slavery for more food. She, by the way, had a neat shape-shifting gift from Poseidon which she used to escape. Long sub-story. But Erysichthon's hunger still wasn't satisfied. Finally, driven mad by hunger and with nothing left to eat, he devoured his own body, literally started eating himself until he died. If that's not a bizarre, cautionary punishment, I don't know what is. It's like something out of a twisted fairy tale or horror movie. Demeter basically said, "You have an appetite for destruction? Fine, let it consume you. Bon appetit." All right, enough nightmare fuel. The bottom line is, Greek mythology is chock full of these crime and twisted punishment tales. They were how the Greeks explored ideas of justice, consequences, and the might of higher powers. And they did it with a flair for the dramatic and the imaginative that still captivates us today. I have to say, discussing all these has been weirdly enjoyable. In a morbid way, sure, but also in that sense of marveling at human creativity in storytelling. These myths have it all. Irony, tragedy, a dash of gross-out horror, and some moral of the story. And I've just scratched the surface. There are even more out there. I mean, we didn't even get into, say, people like Salmoneus who pretended to be Zeus and got blasted by a real thunderbolt, or the entire city of Thebes cursed with repetition because their king offended Dionysus. Oh boy, but we'll be here all night if I keep going. As we wind down, let's end on a reflective note. Perhaps one reason these tales endure is because at some level we recognize some truth in them, not literally. I hope nobody here's had their liver pecked out by a bird lately, but in how certain actions can lead to self-destructive outcomes. Hubris can isolate you, Arachne's loneliness as a spider, anyone. Greed can make you miserable, Midas and Tantalus say hi. Anger and violence can rebound on you, Pentheus, torn by his own blood. And sometimes, life can feel a bit Sisyphean or tantalizing, striving for something and falling short, or yearning for something out of reach. The Greeks just externalized those feelings into vivid stories. They gave names and faces and unfortunate fates to the things that trouble the human condition. And somehow, knowing these stories, we feel a little connection to the ancient past and maybe gain a bit of wisdom for our own lives. Or at least we get some really cool tales to tell at parties. So, next time you have a task that feels endless, you might joke, "This is my Sisyphus moment." Or if you catch yourself being too proud, maybe you'll remember Niobe and think twice. If nothing else, you can impress or weird out your friends by recounting how a Greek king got turned into a wolf for serving Zeus a special entree, or how a talented weaver became the world's first spider. There's a stupid fact for every occasion in these myths. In the end, the weird punishments of Greek mythology show us one thing above all: don't piss off the gods. And if you're not dealing with ancient gods on a daily basis, probably a safe assumption. The modern translation might be, don't let pride, greed, or cruelty run wild, or life will find a way to bite you in the butt. Possibly literally in the form of eagle beaks or gadfly stings, if you lived in those legends. I hope you enjoyed this epic rundown of mythical miseries. From boulders and hunger to spiders and stone, we've covered a vast, bizarre range. Thank you for sticking with me through it all. I know it's been a long journey. Hey, at least it wasn't 5 hours of pushing a rock kind of long. I've had a great time guiding you through these tales, with a little laughter, a little cringe, and a lot of wonder at the imagination of the ancients. Now, go forth and sleep soundly, with perhaps a newfound appreciation that, no matter how rough your day was, at least you're not chained to a mountainside having your liver eaten by a giant eagle. Count your blessings, right? Sweet dreams, and remember, keep the gods on your good side, or at least keep a low profile, and you'll be just fine. Good night.